defy the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, a systematic analysis of the physiological, anatomical constitution of his transcendental body is given here. Okay, so this is an important sentence, but this was being given here for the, maybe for the first time. I don't know, I haven't been following. But this is the reason why this whole universal form is being presented, as Prabhupada says here. It's in order to defy the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I'd like to add, it's not necessarily to defy the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because that's a valid conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the impersonal conception. I hope I'm not being audacious here, but I would add that it's in order to defy the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as being the supreme conception. Follow? It's a conception. What's that verse? Not that one. The one Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan. How does that start? Right. Yeah. Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavan. So, learn transcendentalists, they know that there's three features, and then they know what they are. So it's a valid conception. It's not the supreme conception. Okay? So this is in order to defy the misunderstanding that the impersonal conception is the supreme conception, the systematic analysis of the physiological and anatomical constitution of his transcendental body is being given here. It is clear from the available description of the body of the Lord, and it says in parentheses, universal form. By the way, there's several different universal forms described. There's one in the Bhagavad Gita, there's another that's described in the second canto of the Bhagavatam, this canto, actually, this is where we are right now. There's one in the fifth canto, there's different, at least, 3 or 4. So anyway, it says that form of the Lord is distinct from the forms of ordinary mundane conception. In any case, he is never formless or void. That's a big important sense there. In any case, Prabhupada's trying to establish the main point. In any case, the Lord is never to be accepted as formless or void, as it says here. Ignorance is the back of the Lord, and therefore the ignorance of the less intelligent class of men is also not separate from his bodily conception. Since his body is the complete whole of everything that be, one cannot assert that he is impersonal only. On the contrary, the perfect description of the Lord holds that he is both impersonal and personal simultaneously. Okay, so let's see, it says here, ignorance is the back of the Lord. So ignorance is a quality. Ignorance is not a bodily part. We're not used to thinking of ignorance as a bodily part. So it's pointing out that, everything that in existence, qualities as well, is part of the personality of Godhead. And if qualities are part of a person, if qualities are part of your conception of the absolute truth, then that necessitates that your conception of the absolute truth has to include a personal feature, because qualities are personal. These cartels don't have a quality. Are those cartels ignorant or enlightened? Are those cartels benevolent or malevolent? You know what I'm saying? Inanimate things don't have a quality. Quality is a personal thing. So anyway, since his body is the complete whole of everything that be, one cannot assert that he is impersonal only. On the contrary, the perfect description of the Lord holds that he is both impersonal and personal simultaneously. The personality of Godhead is the original feature of the Lord. That's an important sense. The personality of Godhead is the original feature of the Lord. It's the original feature. It's the feature that the other features come from, and therefore it's the most important, or the supreme feature. And his impersonal emanation is but the reflection of his transcendental body. So it's something, but it's just that. Those who are fortunate enough to have the view of the Lord from the front can realize his personal feature, whereas those who are frustrated and are thus kept on the ignorant side of the Lord, or in other words, those who have the view of the Lord from the back, realize him in his impersonal feature. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam, Stapitam Yena Okay, so why does this keep coming up over and over again? In Prabhupada's books, right? Like from the Bhagavad Gita right through till right, Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's because it's something that conditioned souls have a problem with. In the very first sentence of the Purport Prabhupada says, in order to defy the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, annihilated as being the Supreme Conception. This is being presented here. So, why would you want to defy a impersonal conception? Because the impersonal conception is defined. When the impersonal conception is taken as the Supreme Conception, that's a form of defiance. It's just like, say you have a society, okay, and you have the civil department and the criminal department, okay, and there's people in the criminal department, and if they're repentant, if their intention is if their inclination is to move towards being law-abiding citizens and following rules and regulations of that's okay, that's good, so that it's tolerated. Okay, this guy was a criminal, but he's moving in the right direction, so it's okay. We won't note it. It's not a big deal out of it. He's coming in the right direction. But if he's stubbornly holding to the criminal mentality, or even worse, trying to encourage other people in that criminal mentality, that can't be tolerated. You see? So that's the idea. That conditioned souls, well, they're not enlightened, okay? And impersonalism is kind of like, can be an unenlightened position. It can be tolerated if the impersonalist is moving in the right direction. But if the impersonalist is stubbornly, adamantly maintaining that, this is the conception, this is the ultimate conception, this is the supreme conception, and is even going as far as to decry and correct the personal conception that Krishna's, God's a person, personal feature, and is influencing other people along those lines, then that can't be tolerated. So therefore, in order to that's why it's required that the Bhagavatam is defying the impersonal conception of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as being the supreme, the absolute, or the ultimate conception. See? So, and it's an ongoing thing. Like in the once again, it's a matter of my understanding is what direction the impersonalist is going in. Like, because Prabhupada says different things about impersonalism. In some purports, he bitterly criticizes impersonalism, especially in the cases when it's being presented as the supreme understanding and offensive things are being said about the personal conception, and other people, the protagonists of that are trying to influence other people in that same understanding. That's not good. But here, for instance, in the third canto, this chapter called Manifestations of Brahma from Vishnu, Prabhupada says this. He touches upon impersonalism, and he says something interesting. So the translation is, thereafter being unable to achieve the desired destination, is referring to Lord Brahma. He retired from such searching and came back again to the top of the lotus. Thus, controlling all objectives, he concentrated his mind on the Supreme Lord. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, Samadhi involves concentrating the mind upon the supreme cause of all, even if one is unaware whether its actual nature is personal, impersonal, or localized. Concentration of the mind on the Supreme is certainly a form of devotional service. To cease from personal sense endeavors and to concentrate on the Supreme Cause is a sign of self-surrender. And when self-surrender is present, that is a sure sign of devotional service. Each and every living entity needs to engage in devotional service to the Lord if he wishes to understand the ultimate cause of his existence. So I found that the second phrase of that first sentence very interesting. Prabhupada says, even if he's unaware of whether his actual nature is personal, impersonal, or localized. See, so to start off with, one might not be completely clear as to the hierarchy of these understandings, and somebody might be thinking the absolute, as it says here, the supreme cause of everything is impersonal. But if they're simultaneously understanding, with a desire to, do the right thing, so to speak, become more enlightened. That's okay. That's what it's saying here, because it'll move in the right direction. It's considered self-surrender, and it's a sign of self-surrender. When self-surrender is present, that is a sure sign of devotional service. So it can develop into that. Actually, the 4 Kumaras are kind of an example of that. Oh, it's in this book as well. The 4 Kumaras, it was kind of mentioned the other day, but it's worth kind of mentioning again, it's relevant. The 4 Kumaras were, they were actually, Prabhupada uses the word protagonists of the philosophy of monism. They were impersonalists or protagonists of the philosophy of monism. So the question might arise, well, if that's the case, what the heck were they doing visiting Vaikuntha? You see? Well, and I asked Mukunda about that question. He said that was a good question. He had to, check Acharya commentaries to really, we never really concluded that conversation. But anyway, my understanding is this, that because if you go back, they were devotees. They went to visit Vaikuntha, and it wasn't just, they weren't just going like on a shopping tour or something like that. Because it actually says here in this text 31, it goes, when the Kumaras, although by far the fittest persons, were thus forbidden entrance by the 2 chief doorkeepers of Sri Hari, while other divinities looked on, their eyes suddenly turned red because of anger due to their great eagerness to see their most beloved master. So this is Sri Hari, the personality of Godhead. So this is being stated, this is before they had their epiphany, so to speak, that transformational experience of actually the Lord showing up and then smelling the fragrance of the tulsi leaves on his feet. It's saying here they had great eagerness to see their most beloved master, because that's text 31. But then here in text 43, subsequent to that, it says, when the breeze carrying the aroma of the tulsi leaves from the toes of the lotus feet of the personality of God had entered the nostrils of those sages, they experienced a change both in body and mind, even though they were attached to the impersonal Brahman understanding. So it sounds contradictory at face value, doesn't it, right? Because here it's just, back a few verses, we're hearing how their most beloved master, but how is that possible? How is that possible that Lord Narayan is their most beloved master? And here it's saying that they were attached to the impersonal Brahman understanding. Well, people's understanding develops. Just like you have an understanding of a person, and then as you enter into a relationship with that person, it evolves. So that's my understanding of this, which kind of goes back to the earlier point I made, that impersonalism is not necessarily a bad thing. It depends which way you're going with it. If you're an impersonalist and you're thinking that this is the ultimate and absolute and supreme understanding, and you're kind of like saying offensive things about the personal conception, and you're influencing other people in that way. But if you're kind of like the 4 Kumaras were, they were enlightened, already. They were the fittest personalities. They were able to travel to go to Vaikuntha. It's being described that the Lord was their most beloved master. But apparently, at least at that point, despite the fact that they were there, they were able to go to Vaikuntha, and etc. But they weren't fully enlightened. They had a good amount of affection, attraction, appreciation, fascination with this impersonal conception. But when they actually smelled the tulsi leaves, that were the aroma of the tulsi leaves from the lotus feet of the Lord, that changed. Everything changed for them. That was like a game changer, if you could use that expression for them. And then they became devotees, and then they kind of changed their whole attitude like that. So, and this, they're not the only example. In the Nectar of Devotion, it's described, it says, Bilvamangala Thakur was first spiritually initiated for impersonal realization of the absolute truth, but later on, by his association with Krishna in Vrindavan, he became an experienced devotee. The same thing happened to Sukadeva Goswami, who also reformed himself This sounds funny to hear, right? Sukadeva Goswami reformed him? Yeah, he started off, he was attached to that impersonal conception. He reformed himself by the grace of the Lord and took the path of devotional service, giving up the way of impersonal realization. So he was actually on the path of impersonalism, but he gave that up. So Sukadeva Goswami and Govamangala Thakur, who gave up the impersonal conception of the absolute truth to take to devotional service, are the best examples of devotees situated in a neutral state. According to some authorities, this condition cannot be accepted as one of the transcendental humors or rasas, but Srila Rupa Goswami says that even if one does not accept it as a transcendental humor, one must still accept it as the beginning position of devotional service. However, if one is not further raised to the platform of actual service to the Lord, he is not considered to be on the platform of the transcendental. So in other words, it's not necessarily bad to be in that place, but it depends where you go from there. If like Sukadeva Goswami, Bilvamangala Thakur, and the four Kumaras, you progress from that impersonal realization or understanding to devotional service, okay, that's all right. But if you stubbornly try to, adhere to that, and you criticize and deride the personal conception and influence other people along those lines too, then no, that's not tolerable. That's not tolerable. Now, one example of that was that, if I'm remembering the names correctly, there was this one devotee of Lord Chaitanya, I believe his name was Bhagavanacharya, I think that's who it was. He was traveling to see Lord Chaitanya, and there was this fellow, I won't refer to him as a devotee because Lord Chaitanya didn't really consider him a devotee. I think his name was Ram Vishvash. He traveled along with him. What? Oh, it was Jagannath Bhatta who was traveling.
Bhagavanacharya's brother was an impersonalist.
Bhagavanacharya. But it's what the story I'm trying to remember is that there was this devotee who accompanied. Yes, right. And he was chanting the whole way. He carried his luggage, and he was chanting the whole way, round, 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 round. And it was like he was behaving like a real bhakta. And when he got there, who was the personality he was helping again? Raghunath Bhatta. Okay, so he's helping Raghunath Bhatta, very confidential devotee of Lord Chaitanya. He's assisting him. He's carrying his baggage. And the whole way along the way is chanting Ram, 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 Ram. So when he got there, Raghunath Bhatta introduced him to Lord Chaitanya. He said, and here is Ram Vishvash, thinking that Lord Chaitanya would be pleased to meet him. And Lord Chaitanya neglected him, right? He didn't pay much attention to him. Yeah, he didn't give him any special mercy, and I think in the purport the reason is given is because Lord Chaitanya could understand that he was like superficially, behaving like a devotee, but inwardly he had this desire to merge and become Ram. He's chanting. So, I wasn't good. So he had the wrong idea. So as I said, a lot depends on the attitude of the person and which direction they're going with that. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he was an impersonalist, but he wasn't offensive. He wasn't like a Mayavadi. When Lord Chaitanya, when he had the good fortune of talking with Lord Chaitanya, initially he was trying to instruct Lord Chaitanya with Vedanta Sutra, and then, remember after 7 days, he said, well, you're just sitting there and you're not saying anything, and I don't know if you're understanding the Vedanta Sutra. And Lord Chaitanya's response was, I understand Vedanta Sutra perfectly. What I don't understand is your explanations of it. They're just, clouding. It's like putting clouds in front of the sun. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya got shocked. Anyway, then Lord Chaitanya went on to explain things properly. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya accepted. He accepted, and he surrendered, and he became a devotee. He became converted to a devotee. And then Lord Chaitanya accepted him as a devotee. He accepted him as a devotee. He didn't think, well, this guy wasn't a person. No, because he had a change of heart. And so much so that when Lord Chaitanya was ready to embark on his tour of South India, this took place in Jagannath Puri, and when Lord Chaitanya wanted to go from there to Jagannath, to South India, he went to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and asked him for his blessings. And then in the purport, Prabhupada explains that it's okay, devotees can, even a Grihastha, even though he was a Grihastha, and just a couple of weeks ago probably, he was an impersonalist, Lord Chaitanya was asking him for blessings, to his trip like that. So, you know, he accepted him as a devotee. So the idea is to become a devotee. That's the conclusion. You know, it's just, we might be influenced by this or that, personalism, materialism, whatever. But if we're becoming a devotee, then it's all's well that ends well. It's all okay. I mean, another a really good example of that is how what's really important is being a devotee and not external things. Is that past time Lord Chaitanya was in, I think it was Sri Lanka, and he went into this temple, and there was this Brahmin there, and the Brahmin was you know, sitting there, and he was looking at the Bhagavad Gita, and he was crying. And Lord Chaitanya noticed that there was other Brahmins there, and they were kind of looking over and making fun of him, and, you know. And but Lord Chaitanya could see that this Brahmin was looking at the book. He didn't, maybe wasn't reading it. He was just kind of maybe looking, but he was, you know, he was absorbed, and he was crying. Tears were coming. So Lord Chaitanya approached him and said, "Brahmin, what's going on here?" He said, "Oh, my spiritual master asked me, gave me the instruction to read the Bhagavad Gita every day." He said, "But I'm illiterate. I can't read." And these other Brahmins know that, and they kind of, you know, they make fun of me sometimes and like that. He said, "But, you know, so, but anyway, my spiritual master asked me to do it, so I'm trying to do it. But I you know, I can't read, so I'm not really understanding. I don't know." But Lord Chaitanya said, no, you're understanding. I could see that because you're looking, you're just flipping through the pages and looking at the picture, and he says, so but you're crying, so what's going on? You know, and so Lord Chaitanya, the Brahmin explained to Lord Chaitanya that, well, you know, I can't read, but I'm looking at this picture, and I see this picture of how Krishna became Arjuna's chariot driver. And I'm just remembering how kind and merciful Krishna is to his devotees. That even, you know, because authority, it's not an exalted position in India, right? You know, they have, you know, divisions of labor. A chariot driver is not considered a very elevated occupation. So Krishna is taking the occupation of the chariot driver to assist and please his devotee like that. So the thought of that brought this Brahmin, simple Brahmin, he was a Brahmin, he just was illiterate, to tears. So when Lord Chaitanya heard his explanation, Lord Chaitanya said, no. You are the real scholar of the Bhagavad Gita. And he embraced him. And you're the real student of the Bhagavad Gita. And, you know, he embraced him. And these other fellows, there's no mention whether they were devotees or not, but they might not have been devotees. Even though they were Brahmins and they were literate, and they were making fun of this Brahmin who wasn't literate, they might not even be devotees. So it's no qualification. This Brahmin, he couldn't read, but he had the qualification of being, you know, humble and sincere, and he had bhakti. He had bhakti. That's what counts. Another example of this is the, you know, from the Krishna Lila, when Krishna and Balaram, the cowherd boys, Krishna and Balaram, they're out doing something, and the cowherd boys got hungry. So Krishna and Balaram said, "Okay, well, go to this place here, and these Brahmins performing a sacrifice." And go try to get some, you know, remnants of the sacrifice, the sacrificial offering, you know, prasad. And so they went, and the cowherd boys went. And I think that Krishna Balaram told them, go ask him the name of Balaram, because he's recognized as a Kshatriya, because I'm not even recognized as a Kshatriya. Krishna, I'm not even recognized as a Kshatriya. So you probably have bad luck if you go and mention Balaram, Balaram's name drop, you know. So they went, and they started speaking. They addressed the Brahmins who were busy doing their ritualistic ceremonies and like that, and the Brahmins completely ignored them. They completely ignored them. So they went back to Krishna and Balaram, and Krishna told them, hey, don't worry about it, that's preaching, you know. I mean, you can't expect to be successful wherever you go. It's like, that's the nature of activity. But then he said, but then they gave an alternate plan. He said, okay, look, forget about those guys, you know. Let's go to the wives. Go to the wives, you know, and ask them. And let's see what happens. And so they approached the wives of the Brahmins, and they mentioned Krishna and Balaram. As soon as they mentioned Krishna and Balaram, you know, they were there on behalf of Krishna and Balaram. The wives said, oh yeah. Please, you know, what would you like? Here, take this, take that, take this, take that. You know, they were like totally in service mood. So they were the wives of the Brahmins. You know, back in those days, you know, they were exalted because they're wives of Brahmins, but
they weren't big scholars themselves. They were just simple women who were, taking care of their husbands and cooking and assisting, But they were great devotees. They were great devotees, you see. They had bhakti. And then the Brahmins, afterwards, they became aware of what happened, and they were condemning themselves, that, just see, we're doing all this stuff, and we're not, we neglected Krishna and Balaram, our wives, they're actually the real spiritually elevated people. And that some of them, Prabhupada makes the statement that some of them tried to kind of correct themselves, but they found it hard because they were so attached, to the false prestige, and they couldn't give up their abhiman, their false conception of self. So they found it difficult. But